I just wanted to show you my 2012 Yamaha Super Ténéré. I've been calling it Ténéré, but apparently the 700 is the Ténéré. This is the Super Ténéré. It's kind of a fascinating bike because it is not really liked by moto journalists. They have, bashed this bike quite a bit, but I find it fascinating because I consider this bike to be probably one of the better bikes for adventure riders who want the greatest deal on the used market. And it's not something you hear a lot about from moto journalists, because moto journalists, they get like a bike for a couple of weeks, sometimes even days, but their long-term bikes are like yearly bikes. So of course there's nothing that really happens. You never find out about reliability. And I find that most owners do want to hear about reliability and the ease of maintenance and durability over time. And that's really what I'm concerned about most of the time. And that's why I picked the Super Ténéré. It might not be the most competitive bike, but it's the bike that's most likely to take you home without any issues. Especially if you're into riding into deserts and excursions, as I like to do. The last thing I want is a bike that could have a potential malfunction. And another thing, the reason I picked this Super Ténéré is this. It's the shaft drive by Yamaha. And this shaft drive doesn't break. It doesn't need lubing. It just doesn't need any sort of things that the BMW bikes have. So this thing is absolutely super reliable. I've never heard of any shaft drives on Yamahas ever breaking. I'm sure there's been some, but you'd have to look really hard, and I've tried to find a shaft drive that breaks. But if you look up BMW, you'll see lots of shaft drive breaking and engine issues. So that's the reason I didn't go with the GS. The GS is a great bike. It's got the center of gravity lower because the boxer engine is down here. This engine, of course, sits much higher, so it is a little bit heavier feeling, but that's a good trade-off because the last thing I want is the shaft drive problems that BMW seems to have. Now, this one is not perfect. This is a 2012. It's the first year. There's been some issues with it, and I think if you make it past 30,000, you'll never have any issues. This one's at 53,000 miles, and it really behaves as if it's brand new. I mean, it's really difficult to understand because by the time you get to 50,000 on any bike, you start to have some issues. Except like Japanese bikes. Most Japanese bikes, you're going to be fine for like 100,000 miles, 200,000 miles. First, it's the cheap price. This thing is absolutely the most inexpensive, or the least inexpensive ADV bike on the used market. I have seen these go for $3,700. That's kind of rare, but most likely the price with 50,000 miles, 30,000 miles is around 5,000 to 6,000 for the early Super Ténérés. And it doesn't really mean a lot to a lot of people because most people do buy new bikes, but I primarily just buy things on the used market. Another thing is that it's relatively safe. It's got ABS, it's got traction control, and it's got 2 modes of power, which I don't really even care for. I don't need a bike to be electronically very complex. And the suspension on this is excellent. It's got upside down forks. It's got ABS, it's got dual rotors up front, it's got a 19-inch front wheel that makes it much more stable, and the lights are projectors. It's actually kind of a nice projector beam. This bike did predate the Africa Twin, the new Africa Twin, and this one looks a little bit like an Africa Twin, but it is kind of like very wide. It's a wide bike, and I'll explain a little bit more. This one comes with crash bars. That's not standard, but having crash bars on something this big is very good. It's also got a touring windscreen that I find in the summer to be very difficult to ride with because it blocks the wind so much. I got my bash guards here, or my hand guards. Then I have like a little bit of a cruise control thing. And not many mods on this. I do have an aluminum SW Motec bash plate. The engine is very slim at the bottom, and I thought that it's a little bit strange, but you know, Yamaha did a very good job with this, and it sounds pretty good. You know, like when it's idling and stuff, it doesn't sound good at all because it's an inline 2, but when you rev it, it sounds much better than every inline 2 I've ever had. And the rear brake is right here. Very large rotor. It's got ABS right there. Very easy to maintain. If you don't have to do the valves on this, this bike is extremely easy to work on. I mean, I did a brake pad change here. 2 bolts, this comes up. You slide the brake pads in there, and that's it. You don't have to do anything to remove the rear tire. It's just very easy. You just have to undo that to remove the caliper, of course. But, you know, I've done brake pads on different bikes, and it's been a little bit more complex. Usually not much, of course, but I like how simple it is. You know, this tail light is reminiscent of a 2000s R6. You do have a little plate here to put your equipment. One thing I don't like is that it doesn't come with luggage, but you know, that's something that I'd have to get. The seats, they're made out of this kind of grippy sort of thing so you don't slide around, and I do like the tiered seats. Also keep in mind that this seat has 2 adjustable positions. One is for lower, one is for higher. I like to be always higher. I like to see over cars and stuff, and I find it to be much better. The exhaust kind of points down, so it doesn't, like, you know, if your friends are standing here, you're not going to get full exhaust in your face. I kind of like that. Even on group rides, you know, it's good to aim the exhaust down. It is a very large factory exhaust, so you might want to consider getting a new one. I don't know. This is fine for me. This particular part of the engine is much larger. And look at this, the kickstand, it's got this big foot here. Normally, like a lot of ADV guys, they attach something there because when you park on sand or dirt, bikes tend to fall down. And I do appreciate that about this Yamaha. They thought about it. They put like a big plate there. So that's good. This one's got a center stand. I find that this is one of the harder bikes to put on the center stand. I've been told that if you weigh 200 pounds, then there's no issue, but normally, like, you just stand on it and it gives you enough leverage to push it back, but I find that it doesn't seem to work that easy for me. And you know, I've had ST1300s, ST1100s, BMW GSs. I never had an issue putting it on the center stand, but this one, I do have a bit of an issue. I do have a magnetic bag here, so I'm just going to take that out. And on the handlebars, very good handlebars. It's got like this kind of pro taper style that I like. The mirrors work really well. They're kind of like dual sport mirrors, which is good. It's got a hydraulic clutch. It's got a very firm clutch feel, but that's fine. Very Japanese sort of controls here. No hazards button. Usually you'd have a passing button or hazard button. There's nothing. And on this side you really just have the mode selector and kill, and then your start. Really super simple. Like, there's not much going for it. Now ignore my GPS mount here. One thing that annoys me is that you have these 2 cables, and if you reach these buttons, it's a little bit kind of a chore. And also on the new Super Ténérés, they moved this button to the handlebar, and that makes sense because if you want to look at your online MPG calculator, your temperature, all of that, it's kind of a pain to keep pushing this button. I know it's like a very small thing to complain about, but it does matter. If I go ahead and power this, you hear the fuel pump priming. It's got an amber sort of style to this, and the new ones, of course, have been completely modified. So you can adjust modes from touring to sport. Touring makes it sound like it's like broken, but it is good for city riding and commuting. And then you have your time, you have your trip, air temperature, then this is your MPG, so this is your calculator. And then here you have your fuel. I find that this is one of the Achilles heel of the Super Ténéré, is that the miles per gallon aren't great and the range is not great. I struggle to get 200 miles on a tank, which is kind of an issue for me. On this side you have your tack. This might be a really odd complaint, but I find that the font that they use for the tack is a little tacky. So let's go ahead and start the bike so you can hear it run. It's got a very slow starting pulse. Alright, so that's how it sounds, but you know, it's got a lot of torque. You know, it's on paper, it's not a bike that's got a whole lot of power. But on these bikes, I never feel like I need more power, but it does feel like in any gear that you're in, you can kind of power through anything. It doesn't feel like it's lacking of anything. It feels very similar to my NC700, the way it makes power. Oftentimes I'm riding and I'm like in 4th gear and I think I'm in 6th gear, because the way it makes power is kind of like lazy. But once you rev it higher, you know, like past like 5,000 RPMs, it really wakes it up. But you know, it's not perfect. I think the range on this is a little bit lacking. I wish that the MPGs were better, and I wish that the range was better. It's a 6-gallon tank, 6.6 I believe. And of course, the valve adjustments on this are extremely complex. They use the shims. It's the standard sort of thing. Even my V-Strom had that. But the good thing is that these bikes don't require valve adjustments very often because it's a Yamaha, and but to remove you have to remove the tank and the sides just to get to the valves. Also, right over here you have a very neat thing. You turn this like a quarter on both sides. There's 4 bolts, and you can pop this plastic out because this is where the battery and the fuses are. And Yamaha did give you a key for this, which is underneath the seat, so you can pretty much remove it very easily. And on this side you have the radiator and fan, so you cannot strap anything on here. It needs to have some good airflow, and you can look at it from here. It's like asymmetrical. You have a hole here, that's the induction for the air, and that goes into your air filter and radiator and all of that sort of good stuff. But very easy to reach. Oil filter, and you do have your drain pans. There's 2 bolts for draining your oil too, which is kind of odd. I've never seen that system on a bike. But this bike has been very well taken care of by the owner, or the previous owner. It's a really fascinating bike because I kind of like the underdog, and I believe that the Yamaha Super Ténéré is the underdog of big ADV bikes. So if you're interested in getting a cheap ADV bike, one of these could be in your future. It does everything every other bike does for less money.